All right, yeah. Can stand for a moment.
Yeah, fine, not a problem.
Fit enough. All right, guys. Well, welcome to the first panel of the day on asset management and what does it take for nature investing to go into the mainstream. I want to start with introductions from your side and also with a first simple question. Let's define nature investing. Nature investing means so many different things. There's plenty of ways to go about it. So if we could start with introductions from your side, just briefly, your name, what you cover, and what you understand under nature investing.
Yeah. Does this working? Good morning. Thank you very much for having me. It's a great event. It's brilliant to see finance and corporate in the room, and I think it was a very inspiring speech, and I agree with everything that was said. My name is Gorell. I'm the co-founder of Ocean 14 Capital. When you think about oceans, which is 71% of the planet, they often get forgotten about. And when you think about carbon and biodiversity credits, 80% of the carbon is sequestered in the oceans. So the oceans is a pretty important asset class. It's a $3 trillion economy that is ignored. And Ocean 14 Capital, which is a minnow at a 200 million euro fund, is the biggest impact fund within the ocean space. So that shows you the real issue we have there. If we have a chance of fixing everything that we're talking about in this room, we have to focus our energy on protecting the oceans, because that is the life source of our planet. We live on a blue planet where 71% is ocean. So if we don't fix the crisis in the ocean by driving the necessary capital to fix the ocean crisis, we're fucked. So we really, really do need to channel the necessary trillions of dollars in to protect the ocean. Ocean 14 Capital focuses on two key areas of investing: in food security and protecting and restoring marine ecosystems. We think that the biggest problem in the world is the food systems. This was the first time at COP that food was actually talked about. It's been kind of ignored for a long time that a third of greenhouse gas emissions come from big food systems, 71% of pollution into the environment comes from food systems, 60% of water is used for food, and that's the damage it does into the environment without even going into the damage it does to human health, where we have a crisis coming where 500 million people have already got what's called now diabetes. So we need to change the food systems. We think blue foods is absolutely a key solution to that. We need to feed the world. Food security is a massive issue, and blue foods done well has the ability to not only protect the ocean and therefore be able to feed a lot of the poorest people that have these huge, very important biodiversity areas within their country, but also enable the most efficient, sustainable protein to be produced, which gives a healthy diet to everybody on Earth, but also doesn't cause any environmental damage if done properly. So that's what Ocean 14 Capital is focused on. I also am the co-founder of the Blue Marine Foundation, which is the largest marine NGO in Europe, Middle East and Africa, protecting a large area of ocean. In answer to your question of what does nature investing mean to me, I think it is a complex issue. When we look at it from an Ocean 14 Capital perspective, it's how can we have a positive impact on nature and biodiversity. We're an impact fund, so every investment we make will have a positive impact. We put 30% of our carry is tied to us achieving impact KPIs, and every deal that we do will have those impact KPIs, which will be protecting the area of ocean, reducing the catch of wild fish, stopping tons of greenhouse gas emissions going to the ocean, or stopping tons of pollutants going to the sea. And then every company will have to have a key impact action plan to protect nature. And it's absolutely vital, I think, for impact investing to really work. We need to actually make sure that there is performance fees are linked to achieving those impact KPIs and having that positive impact on biodiversity and nature.
Thank you. Welcome. Ingrid.
Hi, good morning. I'm Ingrid Kukuljan. I'm Head of Impact and Sustainable Investing at Federated. Hermes, we're a US, UK-based asset manager. We have 700 billion of AUM, but we also advise on 1.4 trillion. So we engage with companies, and nature is one of our main engagement priorities. We launched the first Biodiversity Champions Equity Fund globally, and to the point what nature investing means for us, we did a lot of research around it and realized that literally the whole world needs to transition. So we actually started to look for companies that are already doing this. The numbers are pretty slim in the public market. If you take MSCI ACWI out of 9,000 companies, we only found 150 that are actually what you would term as biodiversity champions. But what's interesting about those businesses is that A, they're gaining market share, they're growing at double the rate of their peers, and they're exposed to huge TAMs. So it's definitely worth investing for nature. We launched the fund in collaboration with the Natural History Museum, and to the point, there is no data. There is data, you just have to work with the data. There is no off-the-shelf solution. So it can be done, it takes work, but it has to be done, and that's our view. So all of our capital is channeled only to corporates that are helping to preserve or restore nature.
Thank you, Ingrid.
Yeah, hi, my name is Peter Bachmann. I run the Sustainable Infrastructure Division at Gresham House. For those that don't know us, we're an £8.5 billion asset manager. We've got things like we're the largest forestry manager in Europe. We've got social housing. We've got battery energy storage. So quite a sustainability-focused house in general. My division specifically invests into sustainable infrastructure, and that really is trying to tackle the big environmental and social challenges. And our view is that technology can do quite a lot, but fundamentally, ChatGPT is not going to feed you. It's not going to keep you warm. It's not going to protect our nature. So what we try to do is think about real asset-based solutions for those big problems. Examples of that are we built the world's largest fully automated vertical farm, which fundamentally transforms the way in which we need to use land. We built a business from scratch building habitat banks. So these are landscape scale habitat banks like 20, 50, 100 hectares. We convert unproductive land into habitat banks, which we sell the biodiversity net gain units to developers to meet their planning obligations. And we've got a range of other investments that really try to tackle the environmental and particularly nature problems at source. Because like all of us, I think we all see that the biggest challenge that we face is trying to mobilise, ideally 1.4 trillion, into really doing what we're trying to do here and to protect nature, because it's just so fundamental. And I'll probably stop there because there's probably a lot of other things to cover.
Brilliant. Now everybody else is taking the time. Hi, I'm Erik Bindslev. I'm an operating partner in Regenerative Asset Management. We are a private equity fund, real asset fund that invests in farmland across Europe. And as part of the asset appreciation, we're turning them into regenerative, very biodiverse production units. Why we're doing this? Biodiversity loss and climate and water and everything else isn't interlinked. There's intersectionality between all of these issues. We need solutions. Real assets is one game that everybody knows. We can do a 1.0 in real assets, but we need more solutions to get there. 75% of all biodiversity loss is driven by our agricultural system. It's the elephant in the room, nobody talks about it. We're hanging around the fringes, we're talking about technology, vertical farming, releasing land. No, right now, millions and millions of acres are being destroyed. Pristine land or land that was before having a carrying capacity for life is being devoid of life. So this degenerative model that we, for some reason, have put into the orthodoxy of how we produce food needs to stop, and needs to stop very fast. Because why? Biodiversity. Half of our real economy is depending on a highly functioning natural system. Most of our assets or our investments are being driven into forcing nature to its knees and beyond. So we have a paradox to deal with, and we really don't have the traditional cycles of investable asset buckets. So therefore we need to mobilize and we need to work in deeper collaboration, which is why I'm here, because I want to engage with more of like-minded people who see what's coming.
Thank you, Erik. On that note, let's go into a concrete example to show a little bit like how you've worked through one of your investments, perhaps starting with you, Chris, an example that you could share with us that perhaps shows as well the direction you want to keep going towards?
Sure, and I agree with you about the food crisis. So our focus on Ocean 14 Capital, where we believe that we can have the biggest impact on the largest natural ecosystem on the planet, which is the ocean, is to transition the existing industry. So as I said earlier, that's a $3 trillion industry that is very underinvested in, has been slow to use innovation, new technologies, huge amount of SMEs out there that are doing okay, but they're not doing great. And what's very exciting for us with the ocean economy is this convergence of drivers, where actually the businesses that are the most impactful and sustainable are the ones that can be the most profitable and the most valuable. And you see that across our entire investment thesis. So there's a business in Asia that we own, and it's called SciAqua. And the mission there is to transform the shrimp industry, right? Shrimp is going to be a $50 billion industry by 2030. It's growing very quickly. There's huge demand with more middle-income consumers wanting to buy seafood. But shrimp is a very archaic way of farming. So just to bring it down to earth and simplify it, you dig a hole, you lob your broodstock in, you cross your fingers, and you bloody hope you're not going to get a virus and you're going to be able to have your yield. So massive issue where a lot of land is used, a lot of water is used, a lot of food is used, and there's quite a lot of shit because you just put as much in as possible and actually hope that you're going to get your yield. And also an issue for job security. So what we do at SciAqua is we provide the genetics to tens of thousands of farmers across Asia, which guarantees that that broodstock will be resilient to the current viruses that are in the market at that time, which means that these farmers are using less water, less feed, there's less shit, and they're guaranteeing their job security. So we're reducing the environmental externalities across the entire value chain. And the data that we've just had from running this company now for 3 years is that the FCR ratio is improved by 50% of all of the farmers that use our genetics because they're using less feed. So feed within aquaculture is one of the biggest biodiversity challenges because you're basically taking wild fish out of the ocean and you're crunching that up and then you are feeding that to produce a farmed, whether it's a farmed shrimp or a farmed fish. So we're able to reduce not only the natural damaging impact that feed has, but also the most expensive asset that the farmer buys is food. So they're making more money and they're doing less damage to the environment. And that is our mission, to actually then bring into the other environmental services, data monitoring, more sustainable feeds, with a mission to build out what we call prawn hub technologies across the entire industry to transform that and make it more efficient and less damaging.
Thank you, Chris. Definitely a lighthouse example that can be replicated. Ingrid.
So we established something called Biodiversity Impacts Database, where we can actually quantify the biodiversity impacts that every corporate has. And what we looked for was obviously the land use. And the reason for this is, to Erik's point, 30% of topsoil already is infertile globally. And what people don't realize, if you actually want to bring back that topsoil to its natural state, it takes 100 years. So it's not a solution that can happen overnight. And then the second thing that we looked for was, what is the company doing in terms of, are they trying to protect wasteland or verdant land? Usually it's the verdant land that is not being protected. And the last thing was, how many species are they helping to protect with their operations? The reason why this is important is because already today 50% of all the habitable land on our planet is used for agriculture, but it's not for our use, it's to actually feed the livestock. If you look at the data, and this is something that depresses me every day, out of all the big mammals on planet Earth today, livestock account for 60%, wildlife only for 4%, and humans for 36%. And it's not getting better, it's actually getting worse. And if we don't do something about it, and unfortunately, the governments are not doing anything about it, because if you take the European Union as an example, 40% of the budget is going to CAP, and the CAP is designed to destroy nature. There is no sugarcoating it. And we are going to COP16, and instead of making progress, everybody has been stepping back from their promises about what is going to happen. Subsidy system needs to be redone. 50% reduction in fertilizer and pesticides use, which actually they just approved Bayer's glyphosate for the next 10 years. So I think it's the private sector that really needs to step up with these solutions. To Chris's point, not only to protect the planet, but also to ensure that we do have food security, because if you look at the projections, it's estimated that 50% of all the food will be coming from outside the country of origin in the next 20 years. And we all know how that can end up with geopolitical risk that carries.
By the way, just commenting on the 60% livestock, that goes at the top of my long list of depressing biodiversity stats. I didn't know that. Thank you for sharing.
I've got another one for you.
Great.
If you add it
We
up,
could be here all day with those.
If you added up all of the cows on the planet and you looked at the amount of calories they consume, anyone want to guess how many people's equivalent that's worth? We've got 8 billion people on the planet. 8.7 billion people's worth of food is what our cows are consuming. 8.7 billion. You added up all their greenhouse gas emissions, it's about 7 gigatons, which is more than everyone else but China in terms of emissions. So if you want another livestock, there's a couple for you. In terms of examples of what we've done, I mentioned a little bit about biodiversity habitat bank. So I think earlier there was talking about really what we need to do is put a value on nature. And I think for the first time the Environment Act, which is a legislation that came into the UK, was passed in 21, came into force February this year, has finally put a value on nature, whereby if you want to get a planning permission, you need to improve the biodiversity of the site by at least 10%. Now that is either you can do it on site or you do it off. You do it on site, it means you have to give up developable land. So for example, on a typical 100-acre development, we think that costs the developer about 50 million quid in lost development property value of properties there. And so they've got a full opportunity cost. So they can either do it on-site and they lose 50 million quid of value, or they can do it off-site with habitat banks still within the local planning area. So it's not like this is miles away, in the local planning area, and they can do this in such a way that it actually has more benefit for nature. Because the bigger the habitat bank, the bigger the bang for nature. And that's Lawton principles, and it's something that, ultimately you need to think about how do you harness people that have a cost, and then how do you create a solution that has the biggest bang for nature. And we think that's a pretty cool infrastructure asset class where actually you get paid all of your revenues up front as well, which we think is quite a unique structure of this. And they're the sorts of things that we need to think about, tipping points for how do you get more nature investment. I think you need that probably compliance type market to really drive change. Because I guess our challenge is we are looking in the voluntary market, and at the moment there isn't probably people accounting properly for their real value or the value that they have in nature. And until we see that, I think there was a lot of talk about earlier about externalities and properly attracting and accounting for those costs. Until you see that, you probably need some level of regulation to drive that. But we think that that's a pretty interesting model. The UK government, I think, for once, needs to probably be important for something, because they've done something ahead of the curve and really put a value on nature, which I think is catalysed, and it will hopefully catalyse a whole new investment asset class that could bring in billions of pounds into nature investing in this country.
Thank you, Peter. Erik?
We're trying to really, the proof is in the pudding. And if you look at the agricultural system, regenerative farming, on balance, there are lots of studies and lots of surveys saying this, is a lot more profitable when you're doing it without inputs. So in our fund, what we're doing when we stacking this fund, 250, 300 million, it's geared to attract institutional capital. Cornerstone investors, M&G. They filled up the fund with 150 million, so we had a good start. What we do there is we identify agricultural operations that are underfunded, or they have been depleted, they can't produce anymore. We buy it at an optimal price. The real asset, the underlying asset is land, and the infrastructure that is around that land. And then we get to work. And that's the piece that is a bit of an alchemy piece. Regenerative farming demands a lot more intelligence, a lot more thinking, and a lot more place-based solutions than our agricultural system currently provides. And what that means is that by aggregating the land base by which we buy this asset, we can get a regenerative piece. And here's the really complex comment. We need livestock in this system. Animals belong on the land. We've removed them completely from the land, put them into pen, replanting it with soy, and then feeding that soy to the animals. The animals need to go back into natural habitat and provide the ecosystem services. That can enable us to reduce the input. So just by reducing input, we are saving 60% of operating costs. 60. Over time, but we need that transition capital and we need the skills, we need the knowledge. And those two is what our private equity fund is providing to this model. There are other models where we can scale, but we also need to fund farmers and upskill farmers. And that in itself provides new models and new value stacking that we're not less, but we could unlock trillions going into it. Because we have trillions at stake. There are trillions and trillions investing in the natural functioning of our planet, and that's being depleted. 68 trillion is the value of the combined assets of pension funds. Our real economy is about 110, 120 trillion. So that represents half of the annual GDP of the world. Now we need to rethink how we think risk. And to Alessa's point in the morning, there's this orthodoxy about the financial system that we can't reimagine, we can't imagine other things. It's completely made up. Human structures are completely made up, unlike nature, which has been engineered to optimize every single piece of resource, including the driving force of resource, which is the ray of the sun that goes into photosynthesis. But we can reimagine a new financial system. We are super creative at jigging the financial system when shit hits the fan. We can come up with new solutions overnight.
Yeah, but in this case, it's going to be too late.
And so I don't understand why we can't, when faced with such adversity and such opportunity, by the way, that we can't imagine new models.
Because man is an insane species. He worships an invisible God and destroys a visible nature, unaware that the God that he's worshipping is the nature he's destroying. So, you know.
But it doesn't have to be extractive by default.
But I think
it doesn't have to stay that way. Because to your point, Erik, the infinite efficiency of nature is not replicated in our man-made structures and systems, most of which we invented hundreds of years ago, Chris, in your space, on the Justinian Code. And the fact that... I'm not sure what's going on here. Is absolutely, like, the fragility of our economic system has been proven over and over. Nature isn't fragile, and obviously I think we all know here in this room it's not about saving the planet, it's about saving our specific role as a species, turning it from something extractive which eventually destroys itself in the long run into something that actually is in balance with the ecosystems. Okay, so on this note, we're going into again, the heat. So I think that the fire alarm is appropriate, the heat of this panel, because I want to ask you, what do you see as the core problems that need to be addressed to unlock more capital coming into nature and biodiversity? Because we are on the same page here, but obviously for incumbents, to give up a system that might not be structured well and efficient is tough. So starting with you, Chris.
So, I mean, firstly, with the blue economy, I think, as I said earlier, you know, we're the largest impact fund in the blue economy, and we're tiny. We're 201 million euros, and this is a $3 trillion economy that has a natural asset value of $27 trillion. The ocean, the ecosystem services it provides. Remember that 80% of the carbon in the atmosphere is sequestered in the ocean. So there's enormous natural asset where, you know, we're a minnow. So in order to drive the change and to get the capital, we need to have more vehicles, you know, computer says no for pension funds to fund one, so we need to move on to fund twos, and there needs to be, doesn't it? There needs to be more vehicles that can attract that money, and then really in terms of actually monetizing nature from I think that John or David said it first. We need to move to get these carbon credits and these biodiversity credits going, and that's, there's two areas that we're working on that. One with the foundation, the Blue Marine Foundation, and this will come back to an economic point because I know everybody's financially minded in this room, is we're doing a study. So Convex Insurance, they gave us $20 million to study the entire global sea shelf. So 80% of the world's carbon is sequestered in the bottom of the ocean. It lands in the mud and on the sea shelves, not in the mangroves or the seagrass or the seaweed that everybody gets very excited about, but actually in the mud. And bottom trawling, which is the most damaging farming, fishing practice in the world, is displacing and destroying all that carbon. But nobody knows how much or where or what. So what we will come up with by the end of next year is this data set which will basically give you the information of how much carbon is sequestered in these areas, which will then enable those small island states, or what we call global ocean countries that were mentioned, that have these huge biodiversity areas, to be able to monetize those areas, because they'll be able to say, okay, well, I don't want my long line fishing vessels coming in here and taking all the fish. I don't need that money anymore, because actually I will be able to monetize the carbon that is sequestered on the floor of the ocean, and therefore you'll be able to monetize large-scale marine protected areas. And if we can protect 30% of the ocean through large-scale marine protected areas, and one of the issue is the lack of funding and a lot of capital to do that, we have a chance of restoring the ocean, because when the ocean is protected, it has this incredible propensity to recover and it comes back to life very quickly. If the ocean is healthy and full of life because it's protected, then it can do its job of sequestering, absorbing the carbon, producing the oxygen that we're all breathing in this room, and enable us to be able to sort out all the other shit. Because if the ocean can function, the planet probably, and I'm not a scientist, but this is what I could heard, get to 2.5 degrees, that we could have some more time to sort out everything else that's on land. So we need more institutional capital to come into the blue economy to help the transition. We need really to get the carbon and biodiversity credit markets back up. They've been, really hit hard with issues with South Pole and distrust and lack of verification and all the issues that we've had. So we need to get those back on, and we need to make sure that there is a system in the ocean that can actually really have verified carbon and biodiversity credits in order to drive the capital to protect and restore the ocean.
Indeed. Thank you.
Glad you agree.
Ingrid.
I think the first thing that needs to happen is this thinking that nature is permanent. It's not. The way that you should be thinking about nature is the way you get excited about copper, aluminum, any natural resource. It's scarce, and it's becoming more scarce by the day. And this is something that has not been implanted in people's minds. So that's the first thing that needs to change. Second thing is that in terms of the regulation, this needs to be a stick approach, because the carrot is obviously not working. So, from practical point of view, I think TNFD should become mandatory. That would already change the picture a lot, because asset allocators are not analyzing their portfolios and thinking about what are my impacts and what are my dependencies on nature. Because if they were doing this, we would be sitting here and everybody would have $1 trillion under management by now. So if you just look at the pollution, and if you account for pollution, 40% of the global profit pool is gone immediately. So this is just one stat. The second one is that I don't know if you're familiar with the Dasgupta review, Dasgupta said that already today we need 1.6 more Earths to satisfy our consumption needs. We will be hitting 10 billion people in a very near future. We don't have this 1.6 Earths. Last I heard from Bezos, he hasn't found anything in the space. So, we have to deal with what we have here. Third thing that needs to happen is credit. credit ratings are not taking into account the risk that nature brings on the sovereign level. That's being completely dismissed. Global biodiversity framework, we are in Colombia in 5 months. Only 7 countries so far have submitted their biodiversity national plans. That's not that many, frankly speaking, given how many have signed. And lastly, I think you really need to start looking, whether you're a manager like we are or whether you're an asset allocator, you really should be looking into impacts and dependencies that you have in your portfolio, because we are seeing real-time consequences of what's happening with the nature, and you just may end up with stranded assets or assets which are becoming suboptimal, and there isn't much you can do about it. There are great examples. In Arizona last year, Phoenix, they just put a moratorium on all new building that depends on groundwater. That's it. Your asset's gone. Nothing you can do about it. And this is going to become more and more prevalent.
Please.
Same question. I think ultimately we need more capital. So, we're all sitting broadly on a private equity lens. If you look at most strategic asset allocations across every piece of institutional capital in the world, private equity is maybe 3, 4, 5%. That's not going to cut it, right? So we fundamentally need to change that discourse so that it gets into, like, we all have $1 trillion, then we actually might have a chance of doing this. 2, I think we just aren't properly recognising the value of externalities. I know we sort of lightly touch on it, but a carbon tax or something like that is probably what's going to be needed to change the course of direction. I think we do need a stick. If you looked at in the UK, for example, they've got a thing called the landfill tax, probably the tax that no one knows about, but actually has single-handedly taken organic waste out of the landfill system almost overnight. You need to start to think about those types of things. It's a good tax revenue raiser, and actually it also changes outcomes. And the third is probably, like, when I look at now this election campaign, no one's really talking let's talk about that. Let's talk about that.
Another absurd topic.
But the point I'm trying to make there is that actually no one really talks about the rent-seeking behaviour of some of the industries that are really quite polluting on the planet. Like, we're all talking about, let's try to take 2 or 3 billion pounds from some private equity guys. What about the 50 billion that the fossil fuel industry gets in subsidies? Why aren't we talking about that? Because actually, if you put that into public discourse, the political arena, the voters would actually know about it. Because the media is owned broadly by that type of rent-seeking behaviour. None of that gets out. And I think if you had a proper discourse around, let's really talk honestly about where this overall government pot is and where it's going and where it should be going, then I think you could have a more informed debate.
48 billion of subsidies goes to illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing vessels, and these are vessels that are, not only are they destroying the ocean and the biodiversity, but they have criminal activity of murder and human slavery on board. But they're getting subsidies.
But the renewables sector gets 1/10, or another way, the fossil fuel industry gets 10 times the subsidies of the renewables industry. Well, that's just bonkers.
And nature-positive jobs are 3.7 times, in terms of creation, bigger than fossil fuel industry.
100%.
So it's...
My bet is to start closer to home, because there's a lot of stuff we don't control, including this regulation and the government area. So I would start with your investment teams, allow them to go into the subject much deeper to get a more holistic understanding of what it means to invest across different sectors. Break up the silos. There's no climate investing and biodiversity investing and other investing. They're all one. Infrastructure, biodiversity, transport, it's all connected. So get those connectivities. Make sure that your board understands the subject matter. If not, fire them, get somebody who does. Get sure that your C-suite understands it and gets behind it. Once you've done that, then you look into your existing portfolio. What are the systemic risks? Exactly what Ingrid was referring to. This is a real issue. We're talking about, what can provide commercial returns or not. But in a few years, like Ingrid said in our prep call yesterday, we will not have returns from existing investments. Sorry. but we won't. If nature dies, we die, and our economy dies. There's no way to uncouple that. So once you've done that, you look at where the sector that has got the largest effect on biodiversity, and that is the agri-food sector. It's the blue economy, it's the soil economy, it's the existing investments into agriculture. So there you can take your subsidies, which is your existing investments into that industry, and begin to divest from it, and begin, however that is possible over time. Divest from the agrochemical input companies, the genetics companies. It's going to be really hard because guess what? They're really profitable. The loss of biodiversity lies in those companies, in the Cargills, the AGM, the Bayers, the Syngentas of this world. Divest from them, invest in real opportunities that exist in this space. Regenerative asset management is one of the few. We are more. Ocean 14 is one that is doing a really good job on oceans. We are and then we need to expand this field way beyond our funds. We need to attract the big institutionals, and that's where we can't wait for the whole investment value chain to add up. We actually have to work across the value chain. But we can do that. Let's work with the innovators and the people inventing this stuff right through to institutional to figure out how we can retrofit that. And then we can make solutions that really makes a difference and impact instead of going around the fringes. And please stop investing in do less harm. No more precision agriculture, no more genetics. We have drought-resistant crops. It doesn't serve people, it doesn't serve planet. We need to change the paradigm.
Two big narratives on the systemic risk angle here. And by the way, when you say the media is not talking about that, unfortunately correct on subsidies and other topics like this, it's our job. People here, we know these facts. It's our job as well to share it and just keep on talking about it like we're doing today. But
and
here
share the good news stories, actually. Like I
100%.
think as an impact industry, I think that's one thing we've done really poorly. We've not really illuminated with real stories about the benefits that we make. Like everyone just thinks it's sort of private equity money and they're making tons, but actually that does have positive impact. And I think this institution and others, we should really try to celebrate and really show what
and celebrate that we can actually have this impact and return completely linked. We are providing commercial returns of up to 20% IRR from investing in agriculture. I mean, it's a no-brainer. Let's get started.
Grounding in these examples, and also, for instance, in this country, TCFD was not created just to look pretty from a climate finance perspective. It was created thinking about the systemic risk on capital markets and wanting FTSE 150 companies to actually be minimally aware of what that is like. And TNFD should be the next level of that, mandatory. Now, guys, we are running out of time. Unfortunately, there is so much more to discuss. I want to end on one quick last question, which is kind of similar to what we just talked about, but a little bit of a summary. So if you can pick one thing, you had a magic wand, and you can pick one thing that you change right now. This can be regulation, data, structure, whatever you want. What would that one thing be that you would change?
Have a worldwide ban on bottom trawling. I think, good, I'm glad somebody agrees with me. I'll give you an example of where there's a success story of that, and there is, a really exciting way of actually making money. So Norway was the first country to ban bottom trawling. One of our investments is a company called Ava Ocean. So they've now have the license to fish scallops all over Norway, and what they've done is they've built an incredible machine with AI, with cameras, and imagine Dyson suction systems on their vessels, right? And so they go over the fishery, they identify how sustainable that fishery is, how many scallops can be caught to enable that fishery to carry on being sustainable. And then they suck the scallops up one by one, not causing any damage to the seabed, not displacing any carbon, not destroying any biodiversity. And then they have a sustainable asset that they can sell at a premium to a scallop that's been dredged. And there's an example of a technology and an innovation that has come in, when there's been a ban on something that's destroying biodiversity, there's a solution to keep fisheries and employment open and food security, to keep the fishery healthy, to be able to make a lot of money. And now we're taking that business towards the Isle of Man, Jersey, Canada, all of which want to keep their fisheries open but not damage. And then the real sort of icing on the cake of that is when you can then actually value the, if you like, the insetting that business will provide in terms of the fact that it is not displacing carbon. So what's the value that business model is having on enabling that carbon and the biodiversity credits to continue to be securitized in the floor of the ocean?
All right, so we have worldwide ban on bottom trawling. Who agrees with
Trawling.
that? Trawling. Done. Ingrid.
Pricing of globally, because the key word is globally here, pricing of externalities, whether it's nature or people, which is not happening, and make unsustainable way of doing business not acceptable anymore. And if we do this, and the reason why I'm saying globally is if you don't do it globally, you just create dual markets, as is the example of the EU deforestation policy, where countries that don't care about sustainability just continue supporting unsustainable ways of doing business.
So pricing negative externalities into the equation. Pretty nice. Peter.
I'm pretty much the same. I'm just going to give it a name. I'm going to call it an ecosystem services tax.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, we need anything that has an impact on our ecosystem services, and that, coming back to the start of the question, what's nature investing? It is everything. Air, land, water, all the flora and fauna in between. If you're not having a positive impact on that, you need to pay for it.
But how do we put a value on that?
That's our job to work it out.
No,
We're
because the
doing
negative
it.
externalities,
We've got enough
the
data.
positive impact of the ecosystem service.
But it's like if you've got a negative impact, that's what you're paying for.
Okay.
So you've always got to be net positive, otherwise you're
Fun fact,
put money
somebody has put a pricing on pollination services
Yeah.
of nature. Guess how much it is? $500 billion annually. Just saying.
So ecosystem services tax. Who wants that?
Protecting bees.
Funny enough,
Okay.
bees are not the biggest pollinators. Flies are.
Flies.
Could you just tell us very briefly about that's actually a very interesting case study before you go into your magic wand wish.
Flies?
Pollinators.
Sorry, I lost the count there.
Flies are bigger pollinators.
Yeah, the $500 million case study. I was actually trying to get asset owners to go down the road last week in Frankfurt, and I had to get some kind of raw data. We have a lot of data. This is the one thing. Like we don't need to be perfect. We have enough data. We're up shit's creek. We need to do something. But the pollinators, 75% of our food production and our food production, so much is fed to livestock, comes from pollinators, 75%. Imagine that. And they're being decimated around the world. Like, this is terrifying if you put it into perspective. We cannot hand pollinate, billions and billions and billions of plants. We are relying on nature. And what does that mean? What does that mean for our food security? What does that mean for our food pricing? Talking about inflation and cost of living. So we're really faced with a lot of very daunting realities. So I'm going to just boil it down. My magic wand thing will be that everybody here in this room, wherever we sit, wherever we turn up, we carry nature inside. We carry nature with us. Some people said, let nature sit in the boardroom. Every single thing that we decide from now on needs to be with nature at the center of it and be the main consideration for the decision making, both in terms of risk, both in terms of opportunity, and also in terms of what legacy do we want. It's not even the next generation, it's our generation. We always say this, we want to leave a better planet for our children. Well, no, we need to survive and our civilization needs to survive. So therefore we need to carry nature with us always. And guess what? We are nature. So let's refine that bit, that connection. We have it. We just need to unlock it.
Yeah, it's not the next generation, it's tomorrow. By the way, yesterday I saw hail for 5 minutes in June in London. I lived almost 10 years here, never seen that before. How much clearer does it have to get? So on that note, and on the fact that we are indeed nature made of the earth and water, please join me with a big round of applause for our panel today.